The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio, Euro High Definition Radio, Star Cable, and our growing family of broadcast affiliates right across Canada, the United States, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, the Pacific Rim, Asia, India, Africa, and Europe. Worldwide, toll-free, 1-800-610-7035. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. Exonation on January the 6th, 2010, computer scientist Fabrice Bellard hit the headlines worldwide with a record-breaking calculation on pi, that's the number of the circle, to nearly 2.7 trillion places. Now, no pattern was seen or even expected. Mathematicians have all but given up on ever finding any system in pi. Now, in an apparently unrelated project, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, has swept the skies for decades without finding anything. But now a set of 6 numbers that underpin the Bible has been found to predict remote pi positions. Joining me now is the author of the Genesis Grid. Peter Woolford is his name, and we've had Peter on the show many times. It's always a great pleasure talking to you, Peter, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Rob. It's a great pleasure.
Peter, you sent me an email with reference to a British journalist, and I was wondering if you could share with our listeners what the crux of that email was and its significance.
Well, very briefly, because I think we have a short...
We've got about 2 minutes, yeah.
But the gentleman's name is actually Sir Patrick Moore, and he made a comment. He said, "We must take care. There may be another war. Mm-hmm. The Germans will try again, given another chance." Bear in mind that this is a gentleman who's been knighted by the Queen. He's 89 years old. He is the world's longest-running continuous TV presenter, and he presents a program called The Sky at Night in the UK. So he's been doing that for 55 years. He's world famous and highly respected, and he is warning that the Germans will, and that's what he says, the Germans will try again, given another chance. And I was interested to see when I scoured the press today that there was no follow-up comment on that at all, which I found fascinating.
Well, what's the correlation between his show about the sky and the Germans trying again?
Funny you should say that. None whatsoever. His show is to do with the study of the heavens. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason it came up is that the war made a great impression on Patrick Moore. He lost his fiancée of 3 years during the war, and never felt that he could marry anyone else, so he's remained a bachelor. So the war certainly made a very big impact on his life. And, perhaps he bears a bit of a grudge against the Germans for that. I wouldn't certainly blame him if he did, but I think he is talking sound common sense. And so it fascinates me that we have this man who was a patriarch of the nation, who was a broadcaster on television 12 years before our Prime Minister was even born, and yet he is ignored once he says this. You know, you would expect people want to discuss this. Why has he said this? Could it be true? What should we say to the Germans? Should we apologize? There's been no follow-up whatsoever.
Maybe it's looked at as an insignificant comment.
But it's not insignificant because it comes from one of the grandees of the nation, a man who has been knighted by none less than Queen Elizabeth II, a man of 89 years old who still hosts the same program. He is completely compos mentis. He knows exactly what he means. He knows the implications of what he has said. We all know that he knows, and yet nobody follows up. This is not a senile man. Nobody follows up.
Mind you, there's a lot of people these days, Peter, who are saying, let bygones be bygones. We can't live in the past. Let's talk more about this when we come back from this commercial break. Peter Woolford is our guest, www.genesisgrid.co.uk, and we'll be back in 2. Don't go away.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Are you interested in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, or psychic phenomenon? Join me, Tim Bartley, co-host of Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, coming mid-January 2017 to the XZBN. We will channel spirits live and talk to them, revealing all kinds of amazing information. Spiritual attachments will be found and removed on the show, and so much more. To find out when you can listen to Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, visit www.xzbn.net for listeners on both sides of the veil.
Exonation, my special guest this hour is Peter Woolford. He is the author of The Genesis Grid, and his website is www.genesisgrid.co.uk, and we're talking about comments that were made by Sir Patrick Moore. And you know, the some of his comments are rather negative, like he said in the Telegraph, the only good Kraut is a dead Kraut. That's not very nice, not for somebody in a high-profile position, whether he's a knight or not, Peter. So I can understand people just. In fact, I'm looking at some of the comments that have been said around the world, and he's getting a lot of negativity from that comment.
Well, I'm glad that he's at least getting some response from around the world. There was no response in the British press today that I could find.
Well, we've got the Daily Mail here. That's British. We've got the Telegraph. That's British. The Express UK has got stories on them.
Has he?
Yeah.
I looked at those two of those three papers today. Couldn't find anything in the Mail or the Telegraph. Maybe they have an international edition and they're embarrassed to print anything in the home market.
Well, I just did a Google search and. Let me see. I'll read the story. The 89-year-old has warned there may be another war and added the only good Kraut is a dead Kraut, as he disclosed a thought on Europe. Sky Knight and his late love, saying a German general once told him, "You won't win 2 wars, you won't win the 3rd." Sir Patrick admitted he hoped that the prediction, which referred to an economic war, would be proved wrong. And this is a
yes,
quote.
I think the quotation you got there, Rob, is the one that I saw, and I've got those words in front of me too. So what I'm saying is that since that original report, which was in fact yesterday's papers, today's English papers have nothing. Now, normally you would expect some kind of a debate, especially in the Daily Mail. You'd expect maybe a double-page spread commenting on
the Daily Mail does have a story.
It does.
Yeah, and it's the headline is, "I still hate Germans. Patrick Moore attacks nation 70 years after Nazi bomb killed his fiancée."
Yeah, I think that's the day before, to be honest. But let's not debate it.
Yeah, but you know, it seems that this is just an old man who's carrying a grudge. Like, you know, I can understand, you know, if my wife or my fiance would be killed during a war, that I'd have some negative feelings, that you know, like the pain is there. But we can't blame an entire nation, the majority who are new to this world after the war.
Yeah.
You know, for something like that, I think that he's wrong. And as a member of the media, you know, he shouldn't have said that.
Yes. I think his words are unfortunate when he talks about Krauts, and a good Kraut is a dead Kraut. That certainly does smack of a certain amount of bitterness, doesn't it?
It sure does, especially since we're trying to overcome all the negativity that the wars have cost this planet. And you know, it's not bringing a unified front. It's actually causing more of a rift. So if the mainstream media doesn't want to carry more of this, I can fully understand it.
Yes. Although, in fact, I'm just looking back on my records now, I see an article from the Daily Mail on the 17th of August last year, where Simon Heffer, who was quite a highly respected analyst writer for several papers, he has an article here entitled "Rise of the Fourth Reich, How Germany is Using the Financial Crisis to Conquer Europe." So there is a certain amount of disquiet about trends in Europe at the moment, in particular the rise of German power. I mean, I entirely agree with you. I think the choice of words was very poor in this case.
On the Daily Mail webpage, they have over 815 comments from people who have read, and you know, one of them says his fiancée died, he lived through the war, he saw the horrors. Anyone born after the war has no insight into any aspect of it and are not in any position to criticize. Leave him alone. He's entitled to have his opinion, but he shouldn't do it in public. You know?
Yes. Well,
and another person.
I think that he was entitled to express the view that the Germans may try again, given another chance. I think my own feeling is I think that we have enough evidence from history and from the present day trends to ring an alarm bell there and say, well, you know, no nation is perfect. All nations have done evil things. It was the British who invented concentration camps in the modern world down in South Africa.
You know, there's many people who are now calling to have him charged for hate crimes.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, and I think he is clearly not entirely in touch with the environment that we live in now. But I can only say my reaction is that at least I'm glad there has been a reaction, because I couldn't fathom the fact that within a couple of hours I spent examining newspapers today, British newspapers today. I could not today find any comment. Yesterday there was comment. Today there was silence in those papers, and I even in the letters section I couldn't find anything. And so I thought, why is there this silence? And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe we are a little bit afraid of the Germans, a little bit afraid of upsetting them.
I don't think it has anything to do with that. I just think that in today's society, what he's doing or what he has said should be regarded as a hate crime. And according to one of the articles we found here, the stations that are carrying his show are most likely going to drop him.
Yes, I'm not surprised. And I think, you know, this is certainly will, I think, cause speculation that he may be a little bit doolally.
Yes.
Even if maybe he isn't, maybe he is. I must say, to me it comes as a bolt from the blue. What I liked about it was the fact that at least somebody was talking about the German threat. However, obviously this is no way to get a serious discussion going. And I think if in that sense he actually did his cause a disfavor here, because it's really it's distracted us from the main issue.
It's also very distasteful.
Yeah,
it's
distracted us from the issue, which is the main problem, which is the fact that there is this rather lopsided power structure developing in Europe, very much in favor of the Germans, and history does show that Germany has an unfortunate tendency to start wars.
Okay, but Peter, let's face it. Whose fault is it, or to whose benefit is it that Germany is rebuilding itself in such a way? The German people are doing it themselves. If the rest of Europe wants to cry the blues, and if they're going to start getting their knickers in a knot because of the way that Germany is progressing, why doesn't the rest of Europe just get off their butts and do the same thing?
Yeah, well, the answer is complex. I think there are several things about the German Renaissance since the war. You have to bear in mind that when they did invade a number of their neighbors, they plundered a great deal of wealth. And so when you read this quotation from Patrick Moore, from the general who boasted that we're going to win the economic war, what could have been partly behind that remark was the knowledge that Germany did gain enormous amounts of illegitimate wealth from countries such as Greece, and that is one of the complaints that Greece is making at the moment, that the German handling of the Greek problem doesn't take into account the fact that the Germans profited at the hands of the Greeks to an enormous extent. And in fact, it's been said that if the amount of money that the Germans made out of the Greeks when they invaded them during the war was repaid, Greece would be a very prosperous nation.
But what about when the United Kingdom took over India and other places that it conquered? Nobody's looking at the UK and saying, well, wait, geez, we should be worried about the UK. The United Kingdom and Germany have been doing this since the beginning of history.
Yeah. Well, I think that the circumstances were different there. When we had a war in India, it's because the French had actually hired the Mughal Empire to fight us, and we fought back, and we ended up with India. Most of the British Empire was actually expanded through trade. There was very little in the way of conquering and invading, and as I say, when there was conquering, there was actually a reason for it.
Well, geez, I'm a Canadian, and I remember my history very well. And you had the British always trying to gain control of Canada, and the big battle on you had France on one side, Britain on the other side, the Canadians in the middle.
Yeah.
And the British won at the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City.
Yeah.
So that wasn't based on trade. That was based on colonization of Canada.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to obviously claim that everything was perfect for the British Empire, but I think that the Commonwealth that we have as a leftover with the Queen running it, I think is probably a net.
But is it possible that there's still a lot of disgruntled people like this way out to lunch broadcaster in the UK who just don't let go of the fact that, what, the war's over. And if Germany is able to build itself back into a superpower because of the way it is handling its business, how can we say that that's an onset to war?
Well, only history, Rob. I think that nations do vary, and I think that if you look at the history of the First World War, for example, it has been represented that the war began because of the assassination of the Archduke in Sarajevo. That was purely an excuse, a pretext for war. And war had been planned for a long time. Basically, as soon as the German industrial production overtook British industrial production in 1913, it was decided, apparently, at very high levels, that this would actually be a good time to start a European war. I don't think it should be doubted, and that more truth comes to the surface on this subject as time goes on. The First World War was not some accident. It was not something that we blundered into. Germany wanted war, and you may remember the famous picture of Adolf Hitler in the Odeonplatz Square, I think it was. It was a picture taken by a man called Hoffmann, who became Hitler's photographer later on, but they didn't know each other at the time. But it shows a very young Hitler looking extremely happy and jubilant in the middle of that crowd. It was a crowd that had gathered to celebrate the start of the First World War. And
Peter, we've got to take a commercial break here with the news, but I've got to tell you something. I'd be more... if I was in the United Kingdom or anywhere in Europe, I would be more worried about Al-Qaeda than I would be about Germany.
Right.
Because and if we look back in history, Islam has taken over far more countries, and they've pillaged and plundered far more countries than Germany ever has. That is where I think that the next problems lie. I don't think it's going to be Germany. I don't think it's going to be Afghanistan. I think it's going to be the Nation of Islam. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as the X-Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And when I say the Nation of Islam, I'm not talking about the peace-loving people. I'm talking about Al-Qaeda and the other terrorist groups who want to take what we've got.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back, Exonation. Peter Woolford is my special guest this hour. He is the author of The Genesis Grid, and Peter's website is www.genesisgrid.co.uk. We're talking about comments that were made by Patrick Moore, and he's considered to be an eccentric astronomer and a broadcaster in the United Kingdom. He said, and this is a quote, the only good Kraut is a dead Kraut. Now, the guy's 85 years old. I think he's a little bit off his game. You just can't go out in public and say that. There are people who are saying he should be charged with hate crimes, and I agree. And people around the world are coming out and saying, he should blame Churchill for bombing Berlin civilian populations first in a bid to drag America into the war. Hitler didn't want to bomb London or Coventry. And then somebody else says, this is rather surprising. I have read his autobiography, and he expresses his liking and admiration for Werner von Braun, whom many others considered to be a war criminal. And just one more here. Isn't freedom of speech one of the things we fought for? While I don't agree with what he said, I haven't had the same experience, so my perspective may be a little different. So there you go. But the majority of the people are saying, hey, listen, 70 years has gone by since the war. Let it be, Peter, I understand that, Germany is certainly coming up through the ranks in the economic markets in the in the UK. I'm sorry, in the EU. But like I said before we went to the break, I'm not concerned with Germany. I'm concerned with the countries who have flattened out throughout history, using your example of history, who have gone and just ransacked the world. And we're talking about, the Islamics, the Islamic people who are out there to take over, get rid of the infidel.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're worried about both in this. We have possibly a slightly different perspective to yourself on this island, because we don't want to be ruled over by Germany, and it looks very much as if we soon will be. But so far as the Islamic thing is concerned, that is also a very big factor here.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who lives 5 doors away who is a Muslim, and he's a very mild Muslim. I go around and have cups of tea with him very frequently. And I joke with him about the mosque that has sprung up in Watford. There are, in fact, several of them. There's at least 3 of them I can think of. And one of them is an old print works on a big roundabout, and it has this green thing with a spike on top of it. And I have to say that from an architectural point of view, it is the most ludicrous structure I've ever seen in my life. It's almost like as if they're taking the mickey out of their own religion. But they have thousands of these places across the UK of one type or another. Most of them are probably very well built from an architectural point of view. There's the famous Regent's Park Mosque, which has been a hotbed of dangerous anti-establishment preaching for decades now. And we are very worried in this country about the spread of Islam. And if you look at the statistics for Europe, it is absolutely terrifying what is happening to Europe and the way that it will. I mean, the Islamists themselves are predicting that Europe will, within a few years, be under Sharia law because these people are going to be so dominant, so numerous, and they reproduce and have bigger families more rapidly. The figures are terrifying. Even if they've been slanted and falsified, the figures I've read are just astonishing. So we are headed for a bit of a crisis with the Islamic thing. Just the population of these people, many of whom are very mild, but there's just so many of them.
It's this is where my concerns lie. And I can understand being in the UK and having had the World War I, World War II with the people who are basically right across the channel from you guys, that this is a concern. But when do we let things go? I've even heard people talking about, we have Armistice Day and this and that and the other thing, and they're saying, Armistice Day, change it to another day. Stop glorifying wars, and that's all they do.
Yes. Well, I find it pretty tedious when I switch the TV on, and there's yet another event with people laying wreaths for the dead and all that kind of thing. We've got great big statues around Watford, where I live here, for the dead and all that kind of thing, with long lists of names on them. You walk across Tower Bridge in London, there are enormous lists of names from the Boer War over 100 years ago. It's just part of our culture. It's the same in Germany. I drove through Germany a few years ago, and as soon as I got across the border, I saw the most enormous monuments to the Second World War, and these were stuck on people's garden walls.
Wow.
And they were huge. I mean, they were 6-8 feet tall. They must have cost thousands of pounds to make, tens of thousands, and they were literally just part of people's garden walls. So it's everywhere you go. It is unfortunate. It is annoying, and my own instinct is exactly the same as yours. I just want to get on with it, and I'm sure that 99.9% of Germans feel exactly the same way. They're not interested in another war, and the politicians certainly aren't thinking of another war. The problem is that the landscape can change, and it has changed before. And if we get a new kind of leadership in Germany in years to come, given the fact that they are now amassing so much power, they are very much the center of gravity of Europe, and they are operating behind Europe and doing one or two things which I've discussed on the show before, which are a little bit clandestine, a little bit fishy, especially around the Gulf states, with alliances that they're making, not between Gulf states and the EU, but Gulf states and Germany. I know exactly what you mean. I hear this from the older generation in this country. My father says the same sort of thing. We're fed up of talking about the war. We're not interested in the war. And my reaction is, fine, I'm not either, but I'm still not changing my perspective on the world, that I think that the shift of power away from the USA and towards Europe, China being something of a sideshow and a distraction. Look, they're not the real threat. The Soviet Union was never the real threat. I see Europe as being the threat to world peace, and that's why I talk about it in my book. And as you know, I have produced a mathematical proof of the inspiration of the Bible, which is pretty powerful. I'm putting it to the test, actually publicly at a university this month on the 16th. I'm giving a first public presentation at Wrexham University, where I'm going to invite people, as I have up till now, academics, to come forward and find the fault in what I've shown. But there is a strong prophetic element to it, and it does certainly include a prophetic structure of world history, which includes the English-speaking peoples and Germany. And I have every reason to believe that there's going to be trouble from Germany in the future.
What about trouble from the Nation of Islam?
Very much so, too. And I think that... I've mentioned to you before the King of the North and the King of the South, as described in Daniel chapter 11. And that would certainly appear to be German-dominated Europe at war with a Middle Eastern power, which was most likely to be, obviously, Iran.
What about the crisis in the Middle East that seems to have subsided for now?
Well, I suppose it's a bit like the Second World War. People get bored with talking about it, and we've had Iran on the radar for so many, many years, just as we had with Saddam Hussein. And it's a bit like a volcano which rumbles. You never know when it's going to go off, or if indeed it ever will go off. And after a few years, you get bored with it all. And I suppose by the time we've completely forgotten about Iran, then there'll be a crisis.
You know, Peter, I remember the days when you and I were talking. There was upset. Well, it was a year ago yesterday when the President of the United States sent his troops into Pakistan and took out Osama bin Laden. And, here between that time and now, we've had the overthrow in Egypt. We've had Syria. We've had Libya. It seems like within the year there have been so many changes, but yet nobody's talking about them anymore.
That's it. I mean, I think that we all suffer from overkill on these subjects. And after a few months of discussion, it all becomes a bit dull.
Yeah.
We want to move on to something else. And then all of a sudden, a chap like Patrick Moore pops up and says something controversial. So, yes, I mean, studying the world news can be a bit bewildering. Now, I spent a lot of time in Asia in the last few months, which was maybe why we haven't spoken since the 22nd of February. But out there, I got out of the habit of reading newspapers, and I think it actually did my brain some good to get away from the news, and the British news in particular. But time marches on, and I find that the timetable, the prophetic plan laid out in the Bible, is on track more than ever before. The growth of the EU, the developments within the EU, and the enormous time bomb of a financial crisis that they're just, cementing over it, like it's some sort of bomb that's just being papered over. That augurs terrible things for the future. I've got a good quotation, which I can probably find, from Mark Faber. He's the Austrian economist who runs the Gloom, Boom, and Doom, or is it Doom, Boom, and Gloom, famous newsletter for investors. I don't subscribe to it, but he is interviewed a lot in the media, and he is predicting dire things for Europe. He says, well, basically, within 5 to 10 years, we'll have a complete economic collapse in the West. Now, if that were to happen, I'm not saying it will, but if that were to happen, certainly the people who would come out smelling of roses the most would be the Germans, and they would then have all of the power. And I said to you before, we've been bombed by Germany. I bought a house not many years ago with cracks in the wall so big you could see the daylight through them, and those were caused by a German bomb being dropped in the park nearby.
And you know what? We're talking about Sir Patrick Moore and you know what he said about the Germans, and yet he was an RAF bombardier himself, and he's and he's a very outspoken critic of the European Union. So this guy has had it in for the Germans ever since he joined the RAF.
Yes, well, ever since he lost his fiancée. So, he's obviously got a bee in his bonnet. Yep. He's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He has maybe not helped his cause because he's had an opinion which, at one level, to caution about the German power would have been valid. But he's blown himself out of the water by just being rude. And, of course, as you say, most Germans today have nothing to do with the war and not interested in war. They're interested in working hard, making some more money. And that's excellent. That's what I want to do as well.
Exonation Peter Woolford is our special guest. He's the author of the Genesis Grid, www.genesisgrid.co.uk. Have you found out anything else since you've written the Genesis Grid that point towards everything you say in here as being right on?
In terms of world events?
Yes.
Sort of thing. Well, I would say so, yes. I mean, last October, there was a major expansion of the EU, which wasn't even heralded in the news. There was a development whereby the EU expanded simultaneously on the same day in two directions. Because on the left-hand side, they picked up Tunisia, where a British envoy for the EU, Catherine Ashton, was actually in Tunisia signing agreements. So that's North Africa, which was a territory very much coveted by both the Germans and the British in the Second World War, and they fought for it, and the desert rats and Rommel and all that sort of thing. But then on the other side, there was the eastern sphere that the Soviet Union used to control, countries like Belarus, Ukraine, about a dozen countries. I can't roll the names off the top of my head, but these were also all Soviet satellites and regarded as very important as a security buffer against the West. They've now all been picked off by the EU, and they're being absorbed into the EU, and basically the terms are that, if they take on the human rights and various other legal requirements within the EU, then they can be absorbed into the EU, and they can sell their goods and services more freely, and also have their own citizens be employed and be able to move around in the EU. So they're being absorbed into the EU. I'm not saying that in itself is an evil thing, but it's not been very appreciated in the press just how powerful and dynamic the EU is. It's all being portrayed as a lame duck. It's not a lame duck. The reality is really quite different. The EU is very powerful, very much on the top of its game, and this economic crisis that they've got, well, they've just printed €1 trillion, haven't they? The central bank under Mario Draghi. They've just printed €1 trillion. They swore they'd never do any such thing, and then after a few months they turn around and do that very thing. They're going to print their way out of this crisis, and who knows, it may very well work. It may very well be successful.
I also understand that Moore also came out and said that homosexuals are mainly responsible for the spreading of AIDS. Does this guy ever shut up and think about what he's saying before he says it?
Probably not, no. I don't know what the science of that would be. It sounds rather unlikely. I think most AIDS is due to heterosexual activity in Africa, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. This, if we're going to keep our eyes open on this guy, because I think he's a bit of a loony, personally, but that's just my opinion. We'll be back.
89, actually, not 85.
89.
So,
well,
89, yeah.
All right.
Well, he's the only guy in the UK who wears a monocle, if that tells you anything.
We've got to take a commercial break. We'll be back on the other side. Peter Woolford's our guest. www.genesisgrid.co.uk. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We'll be back. Don't go away.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
19 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant, check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today, www.soulbalancing.world.
Welcome back, everyone. Peter Woolford is our special guest, www.genesisgrid.co.uk. Peter, I'd like to go back a little bit, and you're doing a presentation. Tell me more about this.
Well, as you know, Rob, I do have some academic reviews on my website.
Yes.
I also have reviews from people in the media like yourself and business people. I'd like to get more of those. I'd like to get more challenge from the academic community. Up till now, in order to get negative feedback on my book, I've had to pay people. When I've had to go into their houses, I was with a couple of PhD mathematicians last year, and I slapped the requisite amount of £20 notes on the windowsill. We sat down, and they tried to destroy my book. They were both hostile to anything to do with the Bible, so this is exactly what I wanted. But I wasn't able to get anything from them that was really terribly convincing. Now, they did their best to pick holes in my discovery, and I will be incorporating their criticisms in the next edition of the book when I finally bring that out. That won't be for some time yet. I don't want to give a disincentive to anybody to buy the present edition. There's no second edition imminent. But that information will be made available. Now, what I'm looking for at Wrexham is some academic feedback. I'm looking for some hostility. I'm looking for some controversy. I want people to listen to what I'm saying and tell me where I'm wrong, because so far, nobody has been able to tell me, and we're talking about people who are ex-Los Alamos research scientists with PhDs in physics, who read the Bible in its original Hebrew, and who looked at my discoveries and agreed within an hour, they'd agreed I have a patent. People like this. So it has already withstood a considerable amount of academic scrutiny, but I'd like it to have a bit more, and that's one reason I'm doing it at a university, and that's going to be on the 16th of May.
Now, how many people are you expecting to attend?
I don't know. I might get a dozen. I might get 50. Wow. I'm going down there in advance to see some friends down there, and the reason I chose Wrexham is that there's some people I met by chance who had read my book, and one of them was a mathematician. I had a little group of people who'd been discussing it. So I said, well, that's a good old place to go, Wrexham. It's a university. It's not a very well-known university, but that doesn't matter. And I decided to hold it there because I thought that they could help me organize the room and maybe get a few extra bottoms on seats. That's the only reason.
Wow. All right, and when is this happening, Peter?
On the 16th, Wednesday the 16th of May. So that's in about 2 weeks' time.
Well, we'll have to get you on the following week, and you'll have to let us know what happened and what kind of feedback you're getting from the university crowd there.
I'd love to do that, Rob. I'd love to
Peter.
do that. I think it could be very, very interesting.
Well, my friend, as always, time goes by so fast when you're with us. Quickly, give our listeners your website and how they can find out more about you and where they can get a copy of the Genesis Grid.
Yes, there's a newly updated, very simple website, www.genesisgrid.co.uk. And just type in Genesis Grid, we come at the top, and it has reviews. The books can be bought through Author House, and I have deliberately set the price as low, just about as low as possible. They're about £10 each, so they're half of the usual price, and I make virtually nothing from that. I'm just trying to keep the price down so that people can get the information as cheap as possible.
Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Always nice talking to you, and we'll speak to you in about 3 weeks.
That will be marvelous.
Take care, my friend. Be safe. Bye-bye now. Peter Woolford, www.genesisgrid.co.uk. I'll be back on the other side of this news break at 6.5 minutes past the hour as the X-Zone continues. We're right here on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, and our family of affiliates worldwide. My name's Rob McConnell. I'll be back. Don't go away.